Hello all, welcome to part 3 of the router hacking video series at SecurityTube. Now in this video, we will look at how to go ahead and use the tool Hydra to break into a router by using brute force as well as dictionary based attacks. So as we've seen in the previous video, we have our instance of the Viata router running. Now let's go ahead and to our backtrack instance, right? So basically, you must already be familiar with the setup of how the router is accessible from the backtrack machine. So now let's quickly go ahead and do a simple nmap scan to check for which services are enabled on the router. This is going to be the first step, because in order to break into a router, we need to first figure out which are the different services which are running on it. Great. So we see a couple of services including BGP and HTTPS, and we've also got the telnet service. So let's try and connect to the telnet service just to make sure that this is actually the authentication portal into the router. Awesome. So as we can see, we get the welcome to Viata login and we try something default which doesn't work, right? We tried admin and password. So now the question is how to go about breaking into this username password authentication scheme. Now there are various techniques using dictionary based as well as brute force attacks. We'll try and combine a bit of intelligence into it. How do we do that? Well, what we'll actually do is find out a large list of default usernames and passwords and then feed them into Hydra, right? So we basically need to create a file with login:pass. Now, if you actually go on Google and do a simple search for router default passwords, you would get many pages which contains all this detailed info. So if you just take the first one and you go to the default password list, you'll see the vendor name, the model, even the version number, the access type, the username and the password. And this has been exhaustively compiled for probably a couple of hundred routers. So what we would need to do is try out all these combinations of username passwords, also try username as a combination, etc. So in this very simple demo, I'll create a file with a couple of username password combinations. Of course, just so that the demo works, I'm going to be using one of the correct username password combinations as well. But the fact remains, if you have an exhaustive listing of username passwords compiled with you, and if the administrator of the router isn't very security conscious, then generally you would end up breaking into the router using an automated tool like Hydra. So let's proceed with the demo. Let's fire up Hydra, and as we can see, the -C is the option which we need to feed. So we give the router user pass file, we give the server, which is the router IP address, and then finally the service Hydra needs to break, which in this case is nothing but telnet. Let's press enter. Oops, looks like we gave a wrong option. Let's just see what went wrong. Okay, so Hydra says invalid option -C. Okay, it was -C. So let's go ahead, make that quick change, and let's run Hydra. Voila! So immediately Hydra breaks in and says that Viata is a combination which worked on the telnet service. So this was a very simple demo of how we can go about using Hydra to break into a router by having a list of dictionary usernames and passwords. The other option is also to do a brute force, which we leave it as an exercise to you. Now let's try connecting to the telnet service using this username password which Hydra just cracked. And as expected, we've entered into the router. Right, so this is our UID, our group ID, etc. So what is interesting, as we know, is once we break into the router, we can just go into the configure mode and then change the configuration, look at existing configuration and whatnot. So this is where I would urge you also to look into a couple of router command basics, because once you end up breaking into a router, you need to have something which you can do on the router, right? Anyway, so that's all for this video. Hope you enjoyed it. So once again, to summarize, the basic idea is to have an exhaustive list of usernames and passwords which work on routers, both default ones as well as common ones, and then use automated tools like Hydra to break into the authentication mechanisms such as Telnet, HTTP basic authentication, or even SSH. That's all. Thank you. Please leave a comment behind. That would be well appreciated.